You feel the weight of centuries of blood, sacrifice, and madness pressing against your chest. It's dark, and the air is thick with the scent of death. A whisper cuts through the silence, and suddenly you're there, standing on the threshold of horrors committed in the name of salvation, power, and fear. Each step forward leads deeper into shadows, where rituals carve through the fabric of reality. The truth is scarier than fiction, and once you hear these stories, you'll never forget them. But remember, those who seek the darkness too long may find it staring back at them. I never meant to stay in Matamoros this long. Spring break was supposed to be a blur of sun, fun, and alcohol. But that night, the streets were quieter than usual, eerily still. My friends had gone off in search of a wild party, but something drew me away. I didn't know it then, but I was walking toward a nightmare. The whispers of locales talked about a man, Adolfo Constanzo, the Godfather. His followers said he wasn't just a man, but something else entirely. What happened next would make me wish I had never set foot in that cursed town. By the time I realized I was lost, I saw them. They seemed friendly at first, just locals offering to show me the real Matamoros. Their smiles, though, held a darkness I couldn't place. Hours later, I woke up in a cold, concrete room. The air was damp, the stench of decay hitting me before my eyes could focus. Chanting. That's all I could hear. But this wasn't a church, and these prayers weren't meant for any god I knew. They brought me to the center of the room, chains dragging me closer to a stone altar. Adolfo stood there, his eyes alight with a feverish intensity, and in his hand a blade glimmered in the low light. I heard the others chanting, their voices growing louder. The terror gripped me, every fiber of my being screaming to flee, but the chains held me tight. My blood would be his next offering to the dark forces he served. The cult wasn't just about power, it was about control. The bodies of those who came before me were there, hung like trophies, their souls devoured for the sake of protection from the law. As the blade came closer to my skin, I saw something dark moving in the shadows. It wasn't human. It was something older, something that had been watching all along. Constanzo didn't just believe in his magic. He commanded it. As the cult chanted, I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. The ritual was reaching its peak. But something went wrong. There were gunshots outside. The police were closing in. In the chaos, the altar shattered, and Adolfo's ritual was interrupted. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. He knew that without the ritual, he was vulnerable. But for me, it was already too late. The news called it a cartel bust, but no one knew about the rituals, the sacrifices, the dark powers Constanzo had called upon. I was gone, but my story lingered. The whispers in Matamoros had only just begun. The evil had been interrupted, not destroyed. I had heard about Nelson Rehmeyer for years, a strange man who lived alone, practicing hex magic. But when John Blymeyer came to me, saying Rehmeyer had cursed him, I didn't believe it. It wasn't until John's crops withered, his family fell ill, and he began losing his mind that I started to wonder if there was something darker at play. We had to go to Rehmeyer's house to break the curse. Rehmeyer opened the door, his face hidden in the shadow. John had brought a knife. It wasn't supposed to go this far. We were just supposed to take his spellbook and a lock of hair. But something in the air that night made the blood run colder. John lunged at Rehmeyer, and within moments, his life was snuffed out. But as the old man fell, I felt the weight of something darker. It wasn't over. Even after Rehmeyer was dead, things didn't get better. In fact, they got worse. John became more paranoid, seeing shadows everywhere. We had broken into the witch's home and spilled his blood, but the curse felt more powerful than ever. That night, I woke to scratching at my window, shadows moving outside. The curse wasn't just on John anymore. It had spread to all of us. But when the police came, they didn't see the curse. All they saw was murder. As we stood trial, the town whispered of the old ways, of hexes and blood curses. Even behind bars, I could feel Rehmeyer's eyes on me. His revenge wasn't over. After the trial, I thought the nightmare would end, but the shadows still lingered. At night, I could hear the soft whisper of Rehmeyer's voice, calling me back to the house. I wasn't free. I never would be. The curse wasn't just something that could be broken. It was something that lived in the blood we spilled. Years later, I returned to the house. The door was open, and the wind howled through the empty rooms. There, in the corner, lay the hex book. I had thought we destroyed it, but it was untouched, waiting for someone to pick it up again. In 1184, the nobles gathered for a council in Erfurt. Tensions were high, and political alliances were on the verge of collapse. Beneath the grandeur of the cathedral, though, lay a secret, a dark ritual conducted in secret chambers. They believed the sacrifice of innocence would secure their power, but they didn't know that the ground beneath them was as fragile as their ambitions. It started as a tremor, barely noticeable. The nobles looked around, confused. Then, without warning, the floor collapsed beneath them, plunging over 60 men into the dark, foul-smelling latrine below. The screams were short-lived, silenced by the crushing weight of stone and filth. But for the survivors, the horror was just beginning. The whispers started soon after. The disaster wasn't an accident. Those who survived spoke of secret rituals, of sacrifices made in dark corners of the cathedral. Some claimed the collapse was divine retribution. Others believed it was the result of dark magic gone wrong. Either way, those who lived carried the stain of the dead with them. Those who survived the collapse reported seeing shadowy figures at night, hearing the cries of the drowned nobles echoing through the halls of their estates. One by one, they were driven mad, unable to escape the ghosts of their past. The church denied any involvement in the rituals, but the locals knew better. The collapse wasn't just an accident. It was punishment for the sins of the powerful. In the end, the nobles who survived lived short, tortured lives, their wealth and influence doing nothing to protect them from the curse that followed. Centuries later, the site remains haunted. The ghosts of the nobles, their souls trapped beneath the cathedral, cry out for justice. But the world has moved on, and their story remains buried in history, forgotten by all except those brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. I didn't know it would end this way. Spring break was supposed to be an escape, a week of sun and partying in Mexico. But Matamoros had other plans. The night we crossed the border, I could feel something off, a weight in the air, as if the town itself was holding its breath. My friends laughed and ran ahead, oblivious to the eyes watching us from the shadows. I thought it was just paranoia. I was wrong. It was late, and we'd had too much to drink. I got separated from my friends in the crowd. The next thing I remember is being grabbed pulled into an alley where the light barely reached. My mouth was covered, my screams muffled. I fought, but there were too many of them. They dragged me into a van, and I felt the cold press of something sharp against my neck. The last thing I saw before the doors slammed shut was the moon, disappearing behind the clouds. I woke up in darkness, hands bound, the smell of blood and sweat thick in the air. I wasn't alone. Others were there, trapped like me. They whispered about a man called Constanzo, the Godfather, and his followers, who performed rituals in the name of dark gods. Fear rippled through me as they talked about the sacrifices. I wasn't just a kidnapped victim. I was part of something much worse. The door opened, and they dragged me outside. The night was black, but the sky was glowing with the light of fires. They took me to an altar made of stone, stained dark with old blood. Adolfo Constanzo stood there, a cold smile on his face, holding a ritual knife that gleamed in the firelight. The chanting began, low and rhythmic, like a pulse beneath my skin. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. I felt the tip of the knife against my chest. The chanting grew louder. The knife pressed deeper. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But before the blade could finish its deadly path, gunfire rang out. The police had raided the compound. Chaos erupted as the cultists scattered, but Constanzo remained, his eyes filled with rage. He threw the knife to the ground and screamed at the sky. He had been denied his offering, and the gods would be angry. I felt my restraints fall away as one of the officers cut me loose, but the terror hadn't ended. It never would. In the days that followed, they told me the cartel had been performing sacrifices for years, offering blood in exchange for protection from the law. Constanzo was dead, but the fear lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else had been watching that night, something not of this world. And sometimes, when the night is quiet, I still hear the chanting. In the depths of India, where the Ganges River flows, there exists a sect feared and revered by all, the Aghori. They do not shy away from death. They embrace it. At the heart of their practices lies the belief that to truly conquer fear, one must face it head on. And so, they walk barefoot among the dead, meditating on cremation grounds, surrounded by flames and smoke. For them, death is not an end, but a doorway. An outsider, Ravi, had been drawn to the Aghori, seeking something more than life could offer. His initiation began on a night when the moon was hidden behind clouds, and the only light came from the burning pyres. They led him to the banks of the Ganges, where the dead were laid out, waiting for their final rites. To conquer death, you must taste it, the guru said, placing a skull filled with ashes into his hands. Ravi hesitated, but under the gaze of the others, he drank. As the days passed, Ravi became one of them, losing himself in their ways. One night, they led him to a freshly burned body. The Aghori believed that by consuming human flesh, they gained the ultimate power over death. Ravi felt the bile rise in his throat as they handed him a piece of charred skin. He knew that if he refused, he would never belong. So, with shaking hands, he accepted the offering, swallowing it down as the others watched in silence. After the feast, strange things began happening. Ravi would hear whispers at night, voices calling to him from the flames. The Aghori told him it was the spirits of the dead, offering their wisdom. But the whispers grew darker, more insistent. They spoke of revenge, of blood, of things that lurked in the shadows between life and death. The line between the living and the dead was blurring, and Ravi wasn't sure which side he was on anymore. Ravi's transformation was nearly complete, but with each passing day, he felt more detached from the world of the living. The dead surrounded him, their faces pale in the flickering firelight. He saw them everywhere, in the streets, in the water, in the eyes of the other Aghori. They were waiting for him, calling him to join them in the realm beyond death. The final step in his initiation was near, and Ravi knew there would be no return. The night of the final ritual, Ravi stood alone on the cremation grounds. The others had left him, telling him he must face this trial alone. The fires burned low, and the ashes swirled around him. He felt the presence of the dead, their cold hands brushing against his skin. In the silence, he understood what he must do. To truly transcend death, he would have to embrace it fully. As he stepped into the flames, he felt nothing but cold.